Number 10. Boy Jones. What's more intimate than a stalker? Am I right, ladies? If there's one thing women have loved throughout history, it's having every second of their privacy being watched by some creepy man, right? No. I can only imagine it's been worse since the dawn of smartphones and social media. That must be horrible. Well, as it turns out, there were some real creepwads in the Victorian era too. The Boy Jones was a stalker of Queen Victoria who on multiple occasions snuck his way into Buckingham Palace, one time escaping with a pair of the Queen's underwear. What? Arrested multiple times but still somehow found his way back to the palace. But what they should have done was swap the Queen's underwear for a pair of mine after a shift in the garden center I used to work at. Oh yeah, nobody's coming for you after sniffing those bad boys. Oh! Number 9. Graceful words. This was a time when ladies were supposed to be ladies, and that means manners are on the table and elbows are off. Dresses were worn to not show ankles, God forbid an ankle or wrist bust out. I think more importantly, however, or rather unusual that is that women were expected to talk a certain way. Good evening, Mr. Burrows. You must excuse my tardiness. There was a dreadful man screaming at me because my ankles were shown whilst mounting my carriage. Your what was showing, love? Oh, you hurdle it. I can't believe it. Excuse me. I must be someone else. I don't need to tell you guys how ridiculous that is. I say fly out the handle, ladies. Wear what you want, do what you want. Number 8. Shots. Not the kind I like. Well, I don't know about you guys, but nothing ruins the mood for me and my lady like being fired upon. Yikes. I'd like to stay the night, kid, but the automatic gunfire coming from outside is starting to get to me. See? All gangster impressions aside, things must have been that way for poor Queen Victoria as she was shot in her carriage in 1840. A young man fired 2 shots at her carriage. More attacks would actually follow in the coming years. It's kind of hard to feel that certain kind of way after bullets go grazing past your pretty face. The worst thing that ever happened to my generation was making sure nobody was home when you were studying with your boyfriend. I was too busy playing Call of Duty, but at least I never got actually shot at. You know what I mean? That's just a good thing.
Number 7. Mary Pickford. Now I mentioned earlier how these celebrity scandals often came from their love life. Who's dating who's divorcing who. I mean, look at how often we bring up Pete Davidson today. The celebrity dating game is always interesting to say the least. Now, as hard as it is, we can't judge people off of a headline or a scandal. We don't know the full story regardless of what BuzzFeed tells you, okay? The silent film star divorced her husband Owen Moore around the 1920s, and she married a man named Douglas Fairbanks right after. And when I say right after, I mean like Pete Davidson. It was literally less than a month. I'll admit that would interest me as well. Now the public, at first they weren't happy with Pickford. They made assumptions about how long this affair had been going on for, all that good stuff. She's married, how could she, yada yada yada. Her career was on the line. That was until Owen Moore was reported to be a total piece of shit. Yep, he was abusive towards the actress, so she went from being almost cancelled to perhaps the most courageous.
Number 6. Change the channel, pretty mama. Elvis Presley is probably the most famous person to have ever lived. If not, he's an easy top 5. The man sang and shaked his hips to stardom in the early 1950s, crushing music records, and in a sense, was the first A-list celebrity to get that big that fast. He was handsome, rich, and had a great voice. What could be so unusual about the King of Rock? Well, a few things actually. His diet was interesting to say the least, and would have modern fitness trainers fainting just by the sight of it. His favorite comfort food was fried peanut butter bacon banana sandwiches, which to a big guy like me sounds really good, but too many of those could leave you with a gut-busting tummy ache, which when you look at older pictures of Elvis later in life, it kinda adds up. But perhaps the most unusual thing about the King was the way he changed the channel on the TV. He's rumored to have done this multiple times, but on one specific occasion, when Robert Goulet was appearing on TV, this enraged the King for some reason, and he fired a shot from his gun at the TV. Sure, he's got the money to keep replacing them, but someone should have told him there was a TV remote.
Number 5. Jay Leno. Okay, this one comes from 1966. If you're a Beatles fan or a fan of, big guns upstairs, you for sure heard about this scandal. During an interview with the UK newspaper, John Lennon started talking about the group and how their popularity was on the rise, of course. Normal band talk, all that jazz from Jay Leno. But when Jay Leno said the Beatles were more popular than Jay Christ, well, people got upset. A lot of people got upset. He didn't mean anything bad out of it. He noticed that Christianity was on the decline around the world. Meanwhile, the Beatles were selling left, right, and center. So when a US newspaper printed this exchange months later, Christians were so upset. More popular than Jesus. I know what he's trying to say here, but still, also, no. Some radio stations stopped playing the Beatles altogether. Christians gathered in bonfires to burn albums. Jay Leno, not Jay Christ, but Jay Leno, had to apologize numerous times at press conferences. He had to clear everything up.
Number 4. Scarface. Al Capone was a ruthless gangster in the 1920s and 30s, where his life of bootlegging and excess would make him infamous. So much so that people in media rather enjoyed hearing from the portly crook. While there have been celebrities before him, he was honestly one of the first to receive such attention. Even though not a traditional star like singers or actors, he was very recognizable, almost similar to how paparazzi treat celebrities today. So what's so unusual about being snorky, you might ask? Well, it's his downfall that was very peculiar. For years, government agencies and police were trying to take down Capone for a rap sheet so long, you'd have to change your ink cartridge out of your printer twice just to get the half of it. But no matter how many illegal activities Capone may or may not have been a part of, the police just couldn't keep up with him, and the people at first loved to hear about his life of excess. This was due to the extreme levels of corruption at the time. As another Italian mob boss would say, I'm gonna make them an offer they can't refuse, bribing officials or threatening them in order to get his way. So what is the crucial piece of evidence that put him away? If you guessed tax evasion, you're right. Yep. The most infamous criminal in American history lost it all because he didn't pay his taxes, eventually winding up in the infamous Alcatraz prison, where he would grow very ill due to a brothel-related illness. Number 3. Birth Factory. Just pump them out. The faster the better. Quantity over quality. Just get them out. The use of birth control, as you can tell, was not a common practice. Anyone who's over the age of 25, ask your grandparents how many brothers and sisters they have. I'm willing to bet it's in the 6 to 8 range. Let me know in the comments below, I'm curious. A trend that would continue for a few decades after. Education is important, and I'll get to that in my next part. Women were simply expected to act this way. Maybe it was the sign of the times since the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Maybe the factories needed workers, I don't know. Which, in case you didn't know, they used children as employees. Maybe not so nice. Unfortunately, that was when there was an issue, and there were many. They had no HR to go to, and that was the least of their worries, really. Number 2. No school for you. No higher education for women. Banned from going to university. I don't think so, not very nice, no. Honestly, any society that doesn't want half of their population to go to school probably has a few things to work out. It's a boys' club, and they can only go to university so that they can learn to be smarter and be businessmen, so they can earn money and thus have the facilities to court a woman who really doesn't have a choice anyway. Women had jobs, not careers. And they were all the jobs that you can think of. The ones that were too feminine for men, as women were too feeble to participate in a men's job, which is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm happy to say that in 2022, we showed them wrong. Chetty loves everyone. Just remember that, I love everybody. You go, girls. Number 1, strict rules. Okay, so after a night in the bed sheets with the gal that you love, or maybe the one that you found, there's a good chance that 9 months later, a smaller version of you two could be walking around. A byproduct of intimacy, if you will. This was always something I wanted to rant about, but I always found it strange how strict parents and teachers from this time were with their kids. You gotta brush your hair, bed made, and whatever you do, don't ask for more gruel. Please sir, could I have some more? Whatever that Charles Dickens book was, I think it was Oliver Twist. They made us read those books as kids, and I don't know why, because they're kind of boring. From the extreme military code ethics happening at home to the long days in a factory at work, being a kid was tough, man. Earning the punk rock blues of today. I'm just a kid and my life is a nightmare. Number 10. No one's ever really gone. You may have heard that said when losing a family member, a pet, or in the worst Star Wars movies ever made. Sorry, not sorry Disney, those are terrible. But perhaps there is someone who is never really gone. Genghis Khan. Yes, that's right. The ruthless Mongol warrior who conquered so much in his time that we're still talking about it today. So why is this big bad warrior still with us today? Well, that's because of DNA. Yeah, in his time there was lots of activities going on, besides the usual pillaging the village and unaliving those who oppose you. There were a lot of happy endings, let's say, and by that I mean forced non-YouTube friendly conduct, bedroom, happy ending. So much so that when a study was conducted back in 2003, 8% of men in Asia were thought to be descendants of the mighty man himself. 0.5% worldwide. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking about millions of people here. Next time you go out, you may be brushing shoulders with the warrior's kin. Prepare for battle! Number 9. Henry again? Boy, it's really hard not to talk about this guy. But dude was kinda down bad for it. He's just most well known for his mistreatment of his wives, and by mistreatment, I don't mean getting into a fight over whether or not the toilet seat should be up or down and then having a very toxic argument in front of family members. No, because when Henry was upset with marriage, he wanted divorce, which honestly was kind of taboo for the time. Oh yeah, and he also beheaded 2 of his wives because that's how it goes. I know every couple has their issues to work out, but for most dads out there, having sun-drenched beer-fueled weekends, they never go beheading after that. Although, Dad's been staring at the lawnmower for a while and there's a lot of blades on that. Dad? While it is true King Henry VIII did behead 2 wives, he didn't do it to all of them. And at some points we're honestly quite pleased with his holy sanctity of marriage. Anyone who's ever been married can tell you how peaceful and sacred that bond really is. Number 8. The People's Princess. Okay, I know Prince Charles isn't exactly a king, but he is royalty and the man kinda did Diana dirty. That's a quick and half put together allusion to a Michael Jackson song for the English majors and the audience. Being royalty isn't easy. Being royalty in a modern age when paparazzi overwhelm you with lights and cameras just for a juicy piece of gossip like, when was your last bowel movement? Is it slow? Extra extra, read all about it, the princess is constipated. That's just not fun. So after Prince Charles and Princess Diana had been married for a few years, you can understand how excited the media was to find out about their marital disputes. There was 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded, was a quote by Princess Diana that gave the media a field day. Sadly, Prince Charles was having an affair, and it wouldn't be too much longer that Diana would perish in a car accident that may or may not be organized by the royal family themselves. Number 7. Expectations. Alright, this one goes out to all the married ladies in the audience. Hello, how are you? I'm doing great, thanks for asking. I'm curious as to why you got married and what your expectations were. Did you marry your high school sweetheart and live happily ever after? Maybe you had a shotgun wedding and after one night at the saloon. Maybe you just really wanted to find a nice man and settle down, start a family, be a mother. I think any of those options are great, so as long as you have options. In Victorian England, you were expected to do the latter. Women were expected to get married and have kids, and that's about it really. My question is, why were ankles and wrists an issue but giving birth isn't? What I mean is it's kind of a compromising position to be in. All I'm asking is that the girls get treated fairly and given choices and be allowed to show some ankle. It doesn't make any sense. You can look at her business down there, but you can't show an ankle? That doesn't make any sense. I'm a magician. Number 6. Double standard. Divorce sucks. It's no fun. The person you once loved and cherished is now the villain in your story. I love McDonald's and I don't ever want them to be the villain in my story. I love you guys. Gotta get those Happy Meals. Divorce is something that isn't new. Honestly, it was probably invented the second after marriage was. In Victorian times, men had the right to divorce their wife if they had committed adultery. Women could not. Well, if you refer to my last part, you know that men were doing more than a little window shopping when it came to women. When men left town for business, they would have hired the services of a woman who patrolled the streets at night. No, I'm not talking about Batwoman either. So men can divorce women if they dare to do what they did on a regular basis. Yeah, that's totally fair. That's good. Equal. Absolutely. Yeah. Number 5. Emo girl. All the Forever Alone people, raise your hand. Let me hear you roar XD. I like to joke around a lot and say I'm a lawyer, a firefighter, and the cutest guy on the whole wide internet. But if there's one thing I know, it's people. I like people. I love them. I spend a lot of time with them, and after hearing this, I've come to the conclusion that this is where the emo girls come from. I figured it all out. It's down to a science. I'm a scientist now. Do you ever get that feeling in your tummy on Valentine's Day because you know it's going to be another one alone? And you'll be forced to be on your own, and that means sad music and crying in your room. Same, it's Drake's Marvin room for me. Well, single women in Victorian times had similar issues. Since women were expected to marry and have kids, single women who were also forever alone were pitied by society, which I argue is just way worse. No one wants to be pitied. Ugh. Number 4, gold diggers. She take my money when I'm in need. As she driving. Okay, anyway, back to the actual content. Well, not exactly. While today in a place like sunny California, you might see an older man with a woman who's half his age. Maybe he's driving a nice car, or she's got on the very best and latest from Louis Vuitton. Stylish, yeah. Most of us think some thoughts about what we might think is going on there. We can kind of be judgmental sometimes when we see things like that. However, looking through a lens of 2022 to Victorian times might make the women of Victorian times appear to be gold diggers, but in reality, it was because all of their financials were tied to their husbands, legally too. Which, if you can imagine, that system didn't work too well. What if your husband is broke? What if your husband is running amok with sultry lasses on the street corners? Like I said before, no divorce, but even if she could leave him easily, supporting herself afterwards was going to be an issue, especially financially. Number 3, pedestal. I think in a healthy relationship, you ought to put your partner on a pedestal sometimes. Maybe your partner is drop dead gorgeous, a promising athlete, really enjoys collecting stamps. You go, little rock star, collect those presidential stamps. However, Emperor Caligula of Rome had some other ideas. He would literally put his wife, who he claimed to love, up on a pedestal stark naked and let his friends in the military gawk and glare at her. He would also say to her that he could end her life whenever he wanted and put a knife against her for no reason. Weird flex, but okay. This guy was awful to everyone as he tormented and unalived so many people. Well, you sure wouldn't want to see his face everywhere, as he liked to do just that. Built statues of himself everywhere because after losing your family to his tyranny and looking at his wife, you need to know who's responsible for all this. That's messed up. Number 2, Duzong Duzong Duzong. That wouldn't really be a great fraternity name, would it? Well, the Emperor of Duzong of China would think differently, as when he was in charge, that's pretty much what the royal court looked like. Enough drinking to keep AA in meetings for 100 years, and enough ladies of the evening to... Well, I don't have a joke for this one, but there were a lot of them, trust me. Having massive parties like that and enjoying the company of other women is not how you respect your wife. To make matters worse, it seemed that too much partying may have been a bad thing. Who would have thought? As what he made up for in a fun weekend, he lacked in governing, as the Mongols were at his front door, or gate rather. Eventually, his empire would burn to the ground. All thanks to alcohol, and many women who laid down for their lives, literally. Number 1, side piece. Look, I enjoy the company of a woman just as much as the next king sits on his throne. But in my opinion, once you find a wife, it's time to settle down, relax. No more crazy parties like Duzong. This is another generalization, but every king did this. Every king in the past has had mistresses, as if that is a totally okay thing to do to your wife and oftentimes the queen of your kingdom. I'm a reasonable guy, so maybe I can see having your side piece waiting in the wings to be stage center, but it's never one, is it? It's always multiple. Ladies of the past, all I can say is make sure you give birth to a boy and watch your back. They're coming for you. Number 10, Crazy Train. Sharon! I make a lot of jokes about teenage angst. I think it's relatable and funny to look back and see how we acted. We were just going through some stuff, okay? As a rule, that means parents don't understand youth pop culture and music. And why in God's name do you want to pierce that part of your body? So, you can imagine how wholesome suburban parents felt when British rocker Ozzy Osbourne bit the head off a live bat during one of his totally sober performances. The Dark Prince of Rock and Roll is no stranger to controversy. This whole list could be about him, honestly. But one night in January 1982, he bit the head off a deceased bat to show a crowd of rowdy rockers just how metal he was. Rumor has it wasn't the first time he had a winged creature for lunch, as there's a story about him doing the same thing to a dove in front of somebody from a record label.
Number 9, Elizabeth, Eddie, and Debbie. We're going back to the 60s for this one, when Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor were both under contract at MGM. They became close friends, of course, while working there, and more often than not, they would go on double dates with their husbands, Mike Todd and Eddie Fisher. Eddie was with Debbie, and Elizabeth was with Mike. Now, shortly after a plane crash in 1958 that took the life of Mike, Elizabeth was being comforted by Eddie. Of course, that's what happens when you're best friends and all. But that's when things began to get scandalous, dare I say. Their relationship turned into that of a romantic one. Tabloids caught wind of the affair, and like today, headlines were all over town. Eddie ended up divorcing Debbie, leaving their 2 kids as well, to marry Elizabeth Taylor. Their marriage lasted about 5 years, and that's when Elizabeth met Richard Burton while filming Cleopatra, and then another scandal began to unfold. Debbie Reynolds was pretty chill about it as well. She said, hey, if your husband's gonna leave you for anyone, it might as well be Elizabeth Taylor. Honestly, fair enough. Sometimes these celebrity entanglements are a bit fun.
Number 8. I am not a crook. The 1970s America. What a time to be alive. If you lived through the decade, you remember how the way things were. You might also have a pair of bell-bottom jeans that you don't want to remember. But perhaps the most unusual event of the 1970s was Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal. Richard Nixon was the 37th President of the United States, and while he's not a celebrity in the same sense that Justin Bieber is, he was the leader of the free world when TVs and cameras had become available in every household in America. And there was quite a lot of talk about with old Tricky Dick. At the time, the Vietnam War had been raging too long, and in fear of putting Bob Hope out of a job, Americans were divided about the war. Should we end it or keep it going? The political climate was messy, to say the least. So, when very honest President Richard Nixon was running for re-election, a little extra help was needed. People connected to the president were trying to spy on the opposite party's doings, installing wiretaps and microphones at the Watergate building. But one night after a break-in, were caught, and the plot began to unravel. Naturally, the president tried his best to cover up his involvement, but after some saucy tapes of his own were leaked, it was clear he was part of the espionage. Not too soon after, he resigned, and then was immediately pardoned by the new president. Thank God there would never be another scandal in American presidency ever again. Number 7. Midlife crisis. This one's kind of generalized because if I didn't, I'd have to mention almost every king ever. So here we go. Back in ye olde times, the access to better healthcare just wasn't there. Doctors aren't washing hands. Imagine, Buddy eats some greasy mutton and then says, alright, time for your enema. But those aren't the only greasy hands around certain orifices I'm talking about. I'm talking about kings marrying older girls at the ripe age of 12. Yep, that's right. Nothing says experience in womanhood like being 12. People didn't live long, and oftentimes these arranged marriages had ulterior motives, like alliances or business really. However, that does not make up for marrying a 12-year-old who may or may not have started those super weird changing times, like when you were 12 and now there's hair showing up in places that you didn't know there could be hair. I sent a courier to the chief, and he came back with this message. It ain't it. Number 6. Till death do us part. Love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage, but sometimes the crooning words of Frank Sinatra aren't enough to keep people in love. Sometimes marriages end up like the ones we see on sitcoms, but when there's no laugh track, it's not very funny, and sometimes divorce is the answer. Medieval Germans thought this too, and something they practiced was divorce by combat. Basically, the man goes into a hole with his arm tied behind his back, and the woman is free to move around with a sack of rocks. These proceedings are strange, as I'm sure no husband or wife married today would ever get so frustrated with one another that they would want to hit one another on the head with rocks. Oh, the blessings of being married. Number 5. Domestic disturbance. William the Conqueror was one down bad dude. The illegitimate ruler to the throne left a bad taste in some people's mouths, and was just as ruthless in silencing those rebellions that were always uprising against him as he was with the famous battles he was a part of, like the Battle of Hastings. But what I think he should be remembered by is the way he asked Matilda to marry him, or rather the extreme measures he took when she refused his advances because he was an illegitimate leader. William dragged Matilda by the hair out into the middle of the street and beat her until she agreed to marry him. I don't have to tell you how messed up that is, and I sure hope I don't. Number 4. Nero Sauna. The Romans were kind of a big deal, especially if you're into history. Large city, culture, and some other structures are still around today. That's kinda cool. But while the city of Rome may have been the best city on earth at the time, Romans themselves could use a little work. Meet Emperor Nero, the vicious leader of Rome who became emperor through ill-gotten gains. However, in what may have been one of the first acts of flexing the male patriarchy, the divorce, or forced separation of his wife Claudia Octavia, comes to mind. It was a rocky marriage from the start. There was a general dislike from the very beginning, but when Nero remarried, as emperors did, he had Octavia banished to an island, where shortly after she would be suffocated in a hot vapor bath. Her demise was sad for most Romans. Oh yeah, and they tried to make it look like she did herself in. That's messed up, man.
Number 3. Jackie Coogan's parents. Before he played Uncle Fester in the popular Addams Family franchise in the 70s, Jackie Coogan was a child star. His career kicked off after he starred in Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, and when Jackie turned 21, he underwent a long and heartbreaking legal battle with his own mother and stepfather. Yeah, keeping it in the family. This was back before the California Child Actors Bill was passed, so back then, his parents just refused to share any of the money with him. The money that he earned on that film with his face and voice and everything. It was a long battle that he ended up winning, thankfully, but unfortunately, after that long, legal fees just ate up most of what he earned. Like I said, he went on to star in other productions, and the new bill safeguards a percentage of all child actor earnings, but imagine taking your parents to court, especially over money that you earned. That is insane.
Number 2. Michael, are you okay? Okay, Al Capone was the biggest name in Chicago. Elvis was the biggest name in America. The President of the United States is known worldwide, but Michael Jackson just might be known throughout the whole universe. His career would span from the early 70s all the way up into the mid 2000s. He was so famous, I wouldn't be surprised if the first contact we have with aliens is aliens dressed in the Michael Jackson Thriller outfits. He is most likely the biggest celebrity ever, and when you get that big, sometimes it can affect you. Make you do unusual things. This is going to be a speed round, folks, so hold on. Like dangle your children off a balcony in front of paparazzi, buy and own a chimpanzee named Bubbles, try to purchase the rights to Marvel before it was good, try to buy the Elephant Man's bones, owning a literal throne, the multiple legal accusations, the whole skin changing thing, and Neverland. Neverland was just always strange to me, I don't know. With great power comes great responsibility. Michael Jackson was a talented singer, dancer, and honestly amazing entertainer. Just a little crazy, that's all. And with all that pressure and stress, can you really blame him?
And finally, number 1, Natalie Wood's death. If you're a murderino, this one will intrigue you. I normally wouldn't include the passing of a celebrity in a list of unusual things that happened, but the details released by the ship's captain as recently as 2011, this could possibly change everything we know. Natalie Wood was one of the most talented in Hollywood. The actress was in her early 20s, and already she was getting Oscar noms. She's known for West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause. But when she was 43, Natalie was sailing with her husband, Robert Wagner, off Catalina Island in California, and she lost her life. Her death was considered an accident with little details. It was classified as an accidental drowning. But come 2013, it was changed to drowning and other undetermined factors. Wood, her husband Wagner, and Christopher Walken were all aboard the 60-foot yacht November 28, 1981. The 3 actors had dinner in the harbor and then returned to the yacht to continue drinking and eating. Wood went missing around midnight that night, but the new information is that the couple had argued earlier that night at dinner. And according to a new report, the one that was changed in 2013, after a different statement was released by the ship's captain, bruises and scratches that were considered fresh were seen on Wood's body. Woods was officially reported as missing at 1:30 in the morning that night.